All right, so we are recording. All right, and let me start sharing. All right, is everyone able to see my screen? All right, well, thank you, everybody. It's a lot of familiar faces, so glad to see everyone again. All right, we are at our penultimate topic of for the Hill High Impact Learning That Lasts. We're talking about flexibility today, and hopefully we'll have some people sneaking in. Like I said, we had some challenges with the password, so if you hear the ding dongs, Jenny's helping me out there, but I may transfer co-host to somebody else later. So Jenny's going to step out a little bit early. As far as the ATD Golden Gate, I know it looks like I think everybody here is a current member, but if you know somebody who might be interested, we're always trying to grow the community. So hopefully we can connect with some additional people in the future and trying to leverage more of the benefits such as like the e-learning platform. Also some key events that are coming up in the future. We'll talk about that. But again, thanks everybody for participating and joining and helping our community grow. And I think that we also have a lot of people who are currently the Power members as well. So that's a key thing that we try to achieve, because national is where we get a lot of the thought leadership and structures. And really the chapter is where we try to make that local. So we may even have, let me throw Renee under the spot, but Renee is going to be hopefully continuing this conversation in the future too. So hopefully we'll be able to keep this adult learning focus going on. I know we've had a good turnout. We've had a good opportunity for people to network, and we're hoping to just keep that going forward. So more to come on that, but props to Renee on helping the community grow. And I did want to quickly highlight some upcoming events. So I don't know if everyone here is probably registered for tonight's event, but we do have the also the adult learning focus on modernizing your approach to L&D. So if you want to get a last minute registration, you might be able to squeeze in there. But in addition to that, one of our key events coming up is going to be with Shola Richards, and he is a huge focus on civility and trying to bring back a sense of cohesion and just being civil to one another in the world. And that's going to be coming up on the 18th, so next week. And right after elections, right before Thanksgiving, give you the toolkit to have those difficult civil conversations with your friends and family in these times that aren't always civil. So hopefully we'll be able to get a good turnout for that. But please, if you know people who might be interested, if you work with organizations who are focused on this topic of civility and really equity and just being very inclusive and helping people grow, Shola is a very popular keynote speaker, and we're lucky to have him. So please highlight Shola with your friends and family, because we'd love to have a great turnout there. All right. And we also will have our December 16th. That'll be our ultimate Hill topic, assessment is learning. And if you haven't already registered, members, these are free social networking events. So hopefully we'll see you again there. All right. And anyone like Renee willing to run the SIG, if you're interested in hosting on a topic or running for a potential office, like our VP of memberships, VP of programming, president-elect, CFO. So we're always looking for people to bring in new volunteering and help out to keep things active and growing. So please let us know if you're interested in contributing in some way. All right. So now I think hopefully we have a full house. And I see we have everybody here. So if you're just jumping in, you're not hopefully missing anything. So thank you for coming in. As mentioned, this is going to be our penultimate topic on flexibility and keeping the conversation going in adult learning using the high impact learning that lasts model. Okay, as always, just hoping to recap the previous topics that we've gone through. So I think we've touched on this one a lot, but creating urgency was the first one we talked about. And a lot of creating urgency was just relating to real life needs and try to capture those moments that matter for people. So that was one of the key aspects, and really that's one of the biggest drivers as far as the high impact learning that lasts. How about, does anybody else want to take on any of the other ones and talk about what we've already talked about? Action and sharing, hybrid learning, learner agency, or collaboration and coaching? Any favorites? How about, does anybody have a favorite from what we already talked about?
Well, I know I liked what we were talking about with learner agency of, not just imposing information on people, but really having them be engaged and learning what they need to learn. It relates to the urgency. So they have some say in how and what they're learning that's most useful to them.
Yep. So giving people choices, right? My spouse actually even brought this up because she's a doctor, and she's talking about how they use that in hospitals with patients as well, because when you start giving people choices, you start giving them the sense of power, and you sort of stop having that learned helplessness nature, right? So yeah, choices are great. All right. Anybody else? We have hybrid learning, action sharing, collaboration coaching. All right. How about Renee? You were you only made it to the learning agency, right? Okay. How about Haley or Hallie? Sorry. Oh, I think you're still muted. There you go.
Hi there, everybody. I like them all. They're all good. I guess, I'm really interested in today's flexibility discussion, but I guess I'll go with action and knowledge sharing, just the importance of striking up conversations in the training, during the training, after the training, and having some type of action plan for the participants so they can apply what they learn.
Love it. Yeah, so getting people to be more than passive learners, right? So great.
Yes.
All right. How about, does anyone want to tackle hybrid learning?
Well, it's actually a funny topic right now because, of course, we're having to do everything remotely, but I do think a part of hybrid is, different learning modalities, some via Zoom, some in person. And also, I'm not sure this is what I can't remember now, Jeff, if you did this, but I think of it as also, addressing different learning styles. So you're not just using one method of delivering the information, you're doing a bunch of them to help people who naturally absorb information differently learn in their best ways.
Yeah, I think that the term that I have leaned towards is I call right side learning, because the more you can mix synchronous, asynchronous, just make things a mesh. Don't just say, that was a classroom, now that's virtual. That's not the idea. It's what are the parts that work best in these formats. So yeah, great. And I think the last one, collaboration and coaching. Does anyone remember some of the aspects of that one?
I can comment. We were talking primarily about this being about formalized social interactions that you structure. So there is definitely a big unstructured or informal learning component, but that the collaboration and coaching aspect of this model is more about setting up formalized social interactions for mentoring and coaching.
Yeah, love it. I'm glad to hear that everyone seems to have been picking up on all these elements. And I think one of the things you'll also notice is the fact that it's not a pure any one of these, right? So it's not going to be action and sharing is going to be its own distinct thing. It's going to be parts of that informal, parts of the formal, parts of this, parts of that, all the right size, and they all blend together. And like you said, like mixing in the formal aspect, but just because it's the formal aspect doesn't mean it's also not integrating things like chain or choice. But it gives you that opportunity here to really demonstrate what good looks like, and have not all feedback is equal, right? So giving people successful feedback interactions. Great, thank you. All right, so today we'll be doing the flexibility, and more specifically flexibility with formal and informal, and we'll get into what that means exactly. So let me jump to it. And before we go into the full description of it, just a little background on Hill for those who may not have seen this, but It actually comes out of research that's been done out of Maastricht University, and also some of the Nobel Prize winning research done in Stanford as well. And rather than being a model, it's more of a framework. So the idea of here is just these are the main building blocks that help realize successful programs. And the more you leverage, so the more important the program, the more important it is to try to make sure that you're using all of these 7 elements to make a successful program. But it is peer reviewed, and if somebody wants to do a little bit more research, I do have the links there. I highly encourage you. All right. Okay, so let's open it up to our own conversation. And I want, as a group, all of us here, I'll try with a simple-ish idea of in a training program, what's something of a topic that you usually see a lot of locked in, like you have to do it this way. So it's often taught to say, we don't want your choice, we want, just do it like this. Does anyone have any good examples of that?
Well, it's so interesting because I teach conflict management, but I was working with a government agency that absolutely wanted me to have one little list of steps to follow that would help everyone resolve conflict, and you didn't have to think about it or be intuitive or do anything else. And of course, that didn't work very well with my approach, but that's what they wanted.
Okay, good. So Hallie, I think you had another one.
Yes, like in biotech, when the staff is working in a lab, lots of times they'll have, an on-the-job training that's very specific because it's compliance related.
Mm-hmm.
You have to score a certain amount. So biotech, or I'm trying to think of some of the other compliance types, just a lot of lab stuff, lab training.
And a lab kind of, what's a good way to phrase that? Like I don't want to say compliance, but structured, right? Very highly structured environments.
Structured one-on-one, where the person is going, where the manager or a trained person is going through the process to do some type of process where you can't vary from the way you do it, by more than maybe 1% or something of that sort, where it's kind of like, I know you how to do it, you do it, and then we talk about what's done and we test you.
Okay, good. Yeah, a test. I love that. We test you. Okay, good.
And I was thinking another word, if you didn't want to use compliance, would be regulated.
Mm-hmm.
So in a regulated environment where things just must be done in a certain way.
I like that.
And being in the medical industry, I totally get what Hallie's saying.
Yeah, and I'd put down compliance, but I think for banking, but I think regulated is probably a better way to put it, because banking, again, heavily regulated, lots of things we must do in a certain way.
So good examples of things that you don't have a lot of choices, right? Now, challenge that a bit. So we have a highly regulated environments. So why can't we go informal? Or why can't we go some variants? Why does it have to be do it this way?
Well, in my world, someone could die.
Okay. Good.
We'd probably get fined pretty heavily if they found that, we weren't doing certain things.
Okay, good.
Well, in general, there's some kind of large adverse impact that could happen, if you don't do it this way. Sometimes you could recover from it and sometimes you can't. I mean, if you don't do the surgery the right way, then you're done.
Yep.
Yeah. Chris gave some great examples. She called it checklist manifesto. I don't know if you saw that in pilot surgeons. And I know that they have to go through their checklist several times, even if they think they know it, because it's so easy to, like around being sterile or about making sure you've checked every single aspect before you take off in the plane. It makes so much sense.
Yeah.
That's actually the name of a book by Atul Gawande. And Atul wrote not only Checklist Manifesto, but yesterday it was announced that he is one of the 13 surgeons who is on Biden's committee for COVID-19.
Huh.
So there.
I knew his name sounded familiar, Chris, when I heard that yesterday. I couldn't figure out why.
Yeah, Checklist Manifesto. It's something that we used at Kara's Cupcakes project because her husband is a pilot. So.
Yeah, and if you do it, and you follow the checklist, right, you
Yeah.
will remove defects, right? So I think it's often remove defects is oftentimes the reason why. Now, let me challenge that a little bit further and say, okay, so checklist manifesto, the tools like POKE, Lean Six Sigma, all of these things are all about removing defects. But if we also think about the fact that that is in a live environment, and oftentimes those are things that people do to avoid the defect. But if you think about us as people who are helping and to empower people, a lot of times giving them the consequence or letting them actually experience the real life, actually experience the error, helps us to reinforce those tools like the checklists, right? So with the flexibility here, it might be giving people opportunities to look at different ways that something could be done. If you look at design thinking, a lot of the tools people come to, it's, rather than forcing people into saying, we're training you to just follow a checklist, because that flips us to passive learning, right? So that makes us not really think about what we're doing. But when we have a training environment that lets people experience what happens when you don't use the tools, or also potentially give opportunities for process improvement, it helps to engage people a bit more. And I think one of the other risks of things like the structured environments is the fact that people go into the sort of turn off the brain mode too. So how do you keep people engaged even when they're using the checklist? They're still thinking about these things. So,
that just made me think of another example, which is that a lot of police departments are training people with scenarios. So they get to make, they're supposed to follow a certain protocol, but then they get the experience, not the same, of course, but of being in that urgent situation where you have to make split-second decisions and seeing what happens if they don't pause, if they don't do those things. And so it's a safe way to experience those mistakes.
what I like to call that is freedom to fail, right? Because when you've made a mistake in the live environment, you crash a plane, you've murdered somebody in a hospital, we've done something horrible, but we're trainers, we're people who want to give people that safety net, quite honestly, to not be their best. So flexibility gives us that opportunity so that people can build upon a diverse tableau of experiences. So, ideally that, sorry?
Perhaps, I'm sorry, Jeff, but perhaps just letting them generate their checklist from the scenarios, have the group come up with their own checklist, and before you present them with a corporate checklist, management.
So perfect. All right, so that'll lead us well into some of our future activities. So hear this.
Well, in the taxonomy of the cognitive domain, following the steps is a very low level, but detecting the defect, which is analysis, is actually a higher form of thought. So anytime you can teach at that higher level, which is to say, given a situation, can you find where there was the variation and the consequences of it? And that'd be very congruent with being able to have people see the results of not following a specific procedure.
I love it. All right. And I think that we touch on a lot of these topics, and the core here of just is understanding the formal and the informal, right? It's not necessarily one or the other, but like Chris is saying, being able to go through and take something that's more formalized and then building in these opportunities for people to actually express and understand and have more of an interaction really builds more. So For formal learning, let's have a quick breakdown of kind of the differences between the two and as far as the continuum goes. So formal learning, very structured. That's the checklist that we're talking about. Informal learning, that's try and see what happens. Give people opportunities to just do things as they view them. So informal learning, you have this external validation or extrinsic value. Informal, more intrinsic, and you don't get those awards or recognition necessarily. Oftentimes formal will fall into a classroom setting or a more formalized setting, whereas informal, I know it says workplace here, but it's just the doing the job per se. So just whatever's happening in your day-to-day. Formals will be trainer controlled versus learner controlled. So talking about the agency that we talked about last month. And I think that with here, we have the stimuli. So we have external. So these can be someone forcing you to do something versus informal being, I'm doing it because it's something I'm intrinsically interested in and I want to do better at. So if you need kind of that framing of which is which, here's a more standard one. And I apologize, I neglected to put the link that I got this from, but I'll see if I can get that before I share this with everybody. Okay, so as the sort of buzzword for this is the hidden potential, because I think when we get stuck into those formalized, more listening style approaches, you don't give people opportunities to really apply what they're learning and use the learning in a way that's really meaningful to them. So informal learning and the flexibility is going to give people the opportunity to really demonstrate those skills from what they're learning. All right, so some suggestions. This is the agency here, but building in the agency in a way that is working within that formal informal structure. We'll go and do an exercise later about what this can mean as far as finding their own success. But what it really is connecting whatever that topic is with what you're doing. So if I'm like right now, I'm trying to study computer science because it's aligned with one trajectory that my career could go on. So I started to apply those things and go into register myself to special courses because I want to be able to apply that to the job that I have, even though that I'm not technically doing any programming or doing anything like that. But I'm sort of carving out my own niche as far as my career trajectory goes. One element that you'll probably see pop up a couple of times is use mistakes as learning opportunities. Remember that freedom to fail. And a lot of recent cognitive research has actually shown that mistakes can be more beneficial to talk about than successes. So I know people love listening to the podcast about how I made this startup successful and what I did to be successful. But a lot of times success can be a very narrow field that is related to a person's specific circumstances. Whereas when things go wrong, those tend to be a lot more universal because people make a lot of the same mistakes, and getting awareness about what that mistake was and how you can avoid it can be a lot more long-term positive than trying to replicate someone else's success, because that can be so unique to the person. So just to show encouragement for people who want to be those lifelong learners. So I think that you've started seeing the learning in the flow of work and just realizing the fact that you don't stop learning. Everyone here is a member of a community who's dedicated to learning. So this is speaking to the choir, but it's not always as understood. But try to make sure that people have those opportunities to connect and learn and share. In organizations, I think we see this word silo coming up, where people don't really know what happens outside of what they're doing. So in organizations, the more you can have those cross-functional, flattened organizations, the more successful things tend to be from a long-term strategy growth perspective, because you have all these insights that are just missed. Even in scientific research, you have people who've become so niche that they don't realize all the different opportunities they have to leverage what's already been done. So if you look at models and different things that have been highly researched in one field, might be just getting started. I think that the checklists, so as far as aviation goes, prior to the checklists, nobody was doing that. And then we had the doctor taking that checklist, or sorry, I think the Adewande, is that what his name was, Chris? Sorry, I caught her off guard.
Atul Gawande, I think.
Atul Gawande.
Atul Gawande. Yeah. So,
ATUL and then GAWANDE.
oh,
Gawande.
And I have to drop if you want to make someone else a co-host just for safety.
okay,
Sure.
I think I might do that. Joanna, you mind if I make you a co-host?
Nope, happy to.
All right.
Hi, everybody. Gotta go.
All right, thanks, Jenny. Bye. All right. But yeah, so I think with the checklist manifesto, so we started seeing that being applied to different fields, because all of a sudden you're getting knowledge from one group influencing another group. So the more you can have these opportunities for people to share, a lot, that gives opportunities for more success and flexibility. When you're doing the training, building in time to think about what the training is. So not just rushing through it and then getting done and then not being able to actually have an application step. So the more opportunities for building experience models, the more helpful it'll be in the long run. And I think that, this is a theme that we keep seeing again and again with the Hill, but trying to, whenever you're discussing a topic, actually connecting it back to a actual work environment or a real life need. It just helps to get more of that flexibility in there. So, and when I say real life need, it can also be interests. So when somebody is really interested in a specific topic, like I'm interested in computer science, even though it doesn't at all relate to what I'm doing, the more I can say, okay, well, I'm doing work with XML people on my team, and now I actually understand what they're talking about, and then I can facilitate conversations better because of that. It's not something that's all encouraged by my organization, but I like it and it helps me do my job better. So I think that that's one of the key things. Okay, so now that's kind of a quick overview. Before we talked about the formal groups, so we're going to do our breakout session here. And with this breakout session, I want, first, before we go into our breakouts, let's talk about doing a program on public speaking, to make public speaking, to help people become better public speakers. So as this group here, I would like us to say, what are some of the things that often get focused on when you're teaching public speaking?
Your presence, so how you're standing, how you're holding yourself, your tone, those kind of things.
Outlines, how you organize, how you're supposed to organize the presentation and start with an anecdote or whatever, some kind of structure.
So I'm in
preparation.
And
I was
in
going to say your preparation.
we often talk about vocal variety and physical body.
And sorry, I think someone else was cut off before.
I was saying you might also teach about preparation, which kind of goes back to your earlier comment.
Yeah, no, we can add that.
And sometimes you teach also about tactics for overcoming fears.
All right, good. All right. So I think great, overall things. So someone's going to, Toastmasters, they're coming in there. You're going to be teaching them more formalized how to be a good speaker. So let me get my cursor back. Okay, there we go. Now, as we go into our breakout groups, and we'll try to keep these small of around 3 people each, 2 to 3. So here's kind of that formal here of, do these things. So you should. Now, I want you to think of, how do you take a person's interests? So, why did they join that topic of public speaking, right? So how do you take their interest of, I'm getting into this because X, and how do you take that formal of do this, do X, Y, Z, and add in that informal part of, how do we build experiences? How do we let people share more? How do we actually build that informal aspect that connects it back to why they joined it in the first place? Does that make sense? So we're doing the what with the why, sort of. So as a small group of about 2 to 3 people, I would like you to just maybe think through what are some of the formal parts that you're going to put in there, but then how do you connect that to the person? All right. All right. See nods. Any last chance, and I'll keep shifting between the groups if any questions come up. But I'll give us about 10 minutes to go through this, and you can introduce yourselves if you haven't met before, and we'll rejoin about 12:45, and we'll debrief as far as what you came up with. All right, stop sharing, and I'll put these this into our chat text as well, so you can read through this too. Let's see. All right. All right, here we go into our breakout rooms. Okay, here we go. right. I'm always a
Here
little
comes everybody.
like we have. Give everybody back. All right. So thanks for going to the breakouts. Did anyone have a good structure that they'd worked out as far as how they would approach trying to blend the formal and then the informal from the perspective of doing the public speaking or a topic similar?
Well, Hallie and I had some good thoughts. Hallie had to leave, but she was talking about the format that Toastmasters follows and how they help people, build their capacity and their willingness to speak. And I was talking about when I used to, years ago, when I taught public speaking to ESL students, of different ways I would give them a topic like having to do a newscast about events, current events in their country, sports and human interest and politics. And then we would build, okay, how do newscasters structure this? And then practicing pronunciation and coaching them and all of that. And I do something similar in my, a little bit similar in my conflict management certificate program. This week, the final week, the students are presenting one of the weeks from previous. So they're going to summarize the information and add their own information to it.
Yeah, so I like especially with the newscaster because it lets everyone make it a little bit local, right?
Yeah, and they get to be the expert in their country. They were from all over the world, so it was cool.
Yeah, and then do you do anything to sort of a next after that? So after people have done something about their country, do you have something where people after they express interest?
Well, they get to ask questions of each other about what's going on. I also was able to videotape it, and then they got to listen to their own and see what they did well and where they'd like to improve. So that was another level too.
Great. Oh, looks like Chris had to drop off too.
That was yeah, I'll just jump in. So it sounds like Chris had to drop off too, but she and I were chatting a lot about just that last thing that you brought up, Lorraine, the idea of self-feedback. Basically, a lot of what we talked about was giving students the opportunity to self-critique and then immediately practice again. So very short snippets, taping themselves, looking at it, what thing do they want to work on? Okay, the next 30 seconds, do it again. Okay, now get some feedback, do it again. And making it relevant to their situation too, because public speaking for a presentation to a board of directors is maybe very different than public speaking for, I'm running for city council or something. So finding out what it is that the learner themselves wants to work on with respect to their public speaking and allowing them the flexibility to be able to hone in on that skill and get some quick successes could be really motivating.
Yeah, it's good. It's using the sort of shared mistakes, right? So people see it, almost everybody is going to make the same mistake, right? But we also talked about that psychological safety and trust in the group where people feel comfortable enough to be wrong in front of each other, right? So.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to add that when I have my students practice scenarios about a difficult conversation, etc., I always frame it as this is your chance to practice with no consequences. That this is a safe place to make mistakes because you just learn from them and it's not impacting the other person, etc. And I think that helps. That frame helps put them at ease as well.
I love it. All right, great. Anyone else? Any other things you want to add on? Any great things that came out of your conversation?
Joanna, I don't know if you wanted to speak.
I'm okay for you to take it away.
Okay, so I was kind of laughing when Lorraine was speaking because we talked about Toastmasters and teaching ESL as well.
Oh, that's great.
Oh, what a world we're in. So Toastmasters was really about the impromptu speaking, right? So you're given a topic and you just say, go for it. And I used to actually do that in my ESL classes. Also from the ESL world, talked about you spend all this time in the classroom learning how to do something such as use the BART or go shopping. And one of the things I do with my students is that I take them out and I'd escort them and I'd say, okay, now use the BART. You like this? Awesome. Buy it, you know, have a conversation, ask them the questions. And so, so that's some of the things that we talked about. I was also thinking about, as you guys were talking, I've taken a number of business classes during the pandemic, and most of them that have a Facebook community, if I've taken a couple on storytelling, and what they do is they say, okay, here is a topic, go live for 2 minutes, not more, not a significantly less. You've got 2 minutes, you know, like a few seconds before, after, but no more than 2 minutes, go live on this topic. And a lot of people would not do it because they're scared of public speaking. And then those who did it got lots of praises from the community, and they got information on how to be even better next time. And so I liked that that opportunity. I thought that's for some people, that's really good, because that's what they're going to want to do in their community in the future, is speak live, or speak live in this sort of a setting.
Yeah.
That just made me think of one other thing that I did with the students, which was they had to create a survey, and then they had to go out on campus and ask people the survey questions. So the focus was whatever information they were going to bring back, and which they then had to present, but it forced them to interact with native speakers, etc. And anytime you could take the focus off their fear, that's what you were talking about too, and just that this is the task, it helps them get more confidence, I think.
I think I've noticed that too, Renee, as far as the, I've actually called it the high threshold versus low threshold activities, meaning that anxiety threshold, because you have to think about when you're building these informal formal as like, what is the likelihood? And people are terrified to share. So the more you can, you know, building trust by using a poll before you use an open question, right? Because a poll, you're anonymous, open question, you're in front of everybody. So yeah, I love it. Okay, let me, we have 5 minutes left. So I just want to quickly pull up my screen and just finish out some of the ecosystem versus guided structures suggestions. And there we go. There we go. So some additional questions you could ask yourself. So is making mistakes a positive versus something that people avoid? I used to teach, so ESL, I used to teach in Asia a lot. And specifically, I started teaching in Japan. It's interesting teaching a Japanese person versus teaching a Brazilian, a foreign language. Because Brazilians are so confident as far as speaking, they make mistakes, they're good to go, versus the Japanese person, they're taught from a young age that a mistake is to be avoided at all costs. So, you know, trying to make sure that you're giving these things as a positive context. So I think you talked about the reinforcement and encouraging each other. Great. I think one thing that actually is the framing for how I was taught the flexibility in public speaking is a lot of times you'll teach the what, but then people will have interest like introducing humor into public speaking, or doing a sort of research oriented. So letting people, you know, like everyone talked about this as far as, you know, applying it to what you're doing and what you want to do with it. So perfect. And also just thinking about that go further step. So how do you give people options to continue beyond what you're doing? So taking people out to the BART and saying, okay, now book a bus trip, right? So you've changed the context, but yeah, so make it a little bit more. Okay. And from the perspective, self-directed. So ecosystem versus guided. So I don't know if you've seen this acronym before. Well, it's not quite an acronym, but ATD, anytime, anywhere, any device. So you see in a lot of formal settings or more work-oriented settings, it's a big push right now to try to make sure that people aren't constrained by time or devices. So phone versus computer versus tablet versus face-to-face versus whatever, right? So the big push these days is trying to make it ATD. So anytime, anywhere, any device. Also, you see a lot more of the flattening of the organizations that we talked about before from an organizational perspective. Giving people opportunities to have visibility into other parts of the company helps to blend interests and blend experiences. So from the ecosystem perspective, it's really helpful. The kudos boards, the ability to have change champions. I think that someone brought in like change management as a part of this before. So being able to actually give people insights and interest and recognition switches it from that. Remember before we talked extrinsic versus intrinsic? You've now taken something that was intrinsically motivated, and now you're reinforcing it with extrinsic. So the more you can do that, it just encourages it versus stifling it. And just, trying to make your ecosystem more than just a learning platform. So I think that if you see platforms like Degreed, where it's a whole learning experience that's based around what are you interested in, and it's highlighting things and reinforcing the things that you're wanting, and then cross-referencing the things with other things. So the more you can make it personal, the more effective it ends up being. And with guided learning, so I know it's tempting sometimes to cut off the conversation because it's maybe out of scope or whatever it is, but sometimes it can just be a matter of just bringing it back to it and letting people have those sidebars, hopefully a little more structured, a little more formal, so it's not just wasting time, but let people actually have conversations that might be more than just that structured, we need to get through it. I know we talked about the regulated environments in the manual. So the manual is important for doing the job, but it's not necessarily as important for training to the job. So I know that I talked about policies and procedures, right? So policy is a why. So if you can understand the reasons why we're doing things and connecting it, you'll understand the procedure because it's just reinforcing the other. So success is great, mistakes are even better. We'll talk about that. Asynchronous, I think we talked about that. And I think I mentioned, I forget who it was it Linda? Someone mentioned this, the common breaks or doing the lunch. Oh, it was Hallie. I think Hallie had mentioned doing the public speaking, but doing during a time where everyone's together, right? And so you actually let people have that permission to just have the conversation versus structuring it. So common breaks is a great trick to get people to continue the conversation. And right at the 1 hour mark, so we have all our different topics. So we've hit almost all of them. But today we have the flexibility. So just think about the programs you're running. How can you blend the informal and the formal? How can you make it more than just a course? So, and with that, we should be hitting 1 o'clock. All right. Any other questions? Any comments anyone wants to end on? All right. Well, in that case, I really hope that we'll see you on our assessment is learning, possibly one of the most important parts. So next month we'll be closing things up. So hopefully I'll get to see you all again.
Thank you so much for this.
All right. No, thank you all for joining. It's been a learning experience for me. So thank you all.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.